Come on out to Mississauga, it's the greatest place around. Where on a quiet evening you can watch the sun go down. And if you should need a friend, there are plenty to be found. That's why everybody loves that good old Mississauga.
Hello, and thank you for joining us here on Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. Please send in your questions to history@heritagemississauga.org, and we will explore the fascinating stories of Mississauga together. Like to subscribe and follow us to stay up to date on all the heritage happenings with Heritage Mississauga. As part of this program, we are exploring memories, moments, and milestones from the past 50 years with past and present civic leaders and citizens as part of the City of Mississauga's 50th anniversary. On this week's episode, we are thrilled to be joined by a Region of Peel Chair, former long-serving City of Mississauga Councillor, and lifelong Mississauga resident, Nando Iannicca, as we explore his personal perspectives of moments and milestones for the City of Mississauga's 50th anniversary. So it's our pleasure today to be joined by Chair Nando Iannicca, a longtime city resident, or I guess longer resident and longtime former councillor for the City of Mississauga, to share his moments, milestones, and memories with us here for the City of Mississauga's 50th anniversary. Thank you, Chair Iannicca, for joining us.
It's an honor to be with you.
So let's jump right in, and we may not get further than this first question, but what's your connection to the City of Mississauga?
Wow. Well, I guess in one sentence, it would be my entire life.
Yep.
And I go back, I just got some recent data that in the region of Peel now, Mississauga, Brampton, Caledon, up to 70% of us were born somewhere else other than the region of Peel. I, in fact, was born at what was called South Peel Hospital, right down there on the Queensway in Old Cooksville. So that's how far I go back. I think, Matthew, for years, I was the first and maybe the only politician for the longest while that was born and represented the area that they were born in. And we didn't call it Mississauga and we didn't call it Peel. We called it Cooksville. And so my fondest memories are as a young fella growing up in Cooksville in Mississauga. And it really was an idyllic childhood and a beautiful community to be growing up in.
And you have long family, like your family roots, I know, connect back near and dear to your heart is the story of the Cooksville Brickyard, I know. But what's your family roots here in terms of the family coming?
Yeah, it's ironic, and only afterwards do you reflect on it, but we're really Peel through and through in that my father was born in the Abruzzi region of Italy. Abruzzi is kind of the kneecap. It's just outside of Rome. And so from there, they're the agrarians. They're the farmers of Italy. They're the breadbasket. And so my father would always say, every now and again, people say, why did these immigrants come here? And my dad would say, I didn't come here. They came to get me. So post-war Canada, they needed workers to work on the farms. They opened immigration offices in the Abruzzi region of Italy and Calabria and some in Sicily. And my dad signed up. And the next thing you know, he was on, first time he'd ever been on a train to get to the coast, first time he'd ever been on a boat to get across, arrived in Halifax, got on the train, ended up in Caledon. Okay. So he worked 2 years in Caledon, and what it was having done the 2 years, I guess the phrase would be that in having fulfilled your contract requirement, you became a naturalized citizen. So he became a citizen of Canada. He came in 1952. So by 1954, he'd finished his work on the farm, wanted to come back down, and all he knew was Cooksville Brickyard. So he got on a bus on Highway 10 and came all the way down to Highway 5 and 10. The first people he saw, he said, Cooksville Brickyard. Happened to be a couple of Italians that were there. They worked there and they just pointed up the hill and he walked there. He would work there for 40 years on behalf of his wife and his 4 kids.
Unbelievable. I know the Brickyard is near and dear to your heart too, and I mean you were part and parcel with the unveiling of the Cooksville Brickyard Eagle several years ago, and just I think of those legacy things that remember the Brickyard, but also your own connections to it.
Matthew, let me give you one in that regard that you may be aware of. Let's talk about the Brickyard. When my father arrived at the Brickyard, like many of the people working there, they lived there.
Right.
And how they came to live there was when many of the first immigrants arrived, they saw old barracks on the site. And they said, does anybody live there? Goes, no, they're sort of decommissioned. Nobody works there. Believe it or not, those barracks were former prisoner of war camps.
Oh,
You would know the history because you're such an historian, but during the Second World War, if you happened to capture German soldiers, you certainly couldn't take them to Europe because of the battle. So they came down the St. Lawrence, they ended up in Port Credit, and they put them on what is the Brickyard site now. They built their own barracks. And then when the war was done, they were liberated and went home. Here are these Italians that show up and said, well, we know which end of a hammer to hold, and we know how to sort of rebuild and refurbish anything. So my father lived in one of those with 6 men until such time as they made a few bucks. Then with him and his brother, they got a little deposit on a home on King Street in Old Cooksville. And then they made a few bucks, and then the family separated, and I grew up on Argyle Road until we moved to the other side of Cooksville. So there's a bit of a story that there was an old prisoner of war camp from the Second World War on the Brickyard site. One more, by the way, everybody talks about bricks, but they used to make ceramics, and all of the ceramics for the Toronto subway system came from that Brickyard site. And they had a rail line that they would produce, a dedicated rail line that as they were making these ceramics, they could send them directly into Toronto as they were building their subway.
so I'm picturing. I love the memories, obviously, but I'm picturing you're growing up on your family's first home, I guess, as in Cooksville is on King Street. Then you grow up on
Yes.
you grow up on Argyle Road,
Yes.
and then you haven't moved that far away.
No,
And,
no.
I mean, we talk about the changes you've seen in Mississauga, but the changes in Cooksville alone is just something else. What are those early memories? I mean, you growing up on Argyle Road. I mean, what was it like in Mississauga at that time, or
Yeah.
what would become Mississauga?
Yeah. Do you know what I remember more than anything and how our world has changed? So there we were on Argyle Road. I went to St. Catherine's School. I remember, as young as I could be to remember anything, walking everywhere. We didn't own cars back then. There wasn't much of a transit system. And we freely walked with no concern about our health or well-being or what could go wrong. And I would remember that as we walked that route, all the families knew all the families. So if you were wayward or whatnot, my mother would call Mrs. Flamini and say, Nando hasn't come home yet. Oh, he's out front here playing with some of the boys or kicking a soccer ball around. So everybody knew everybody, and we freely moved about. And it was just such an idyllic childhood.
Imagine
What I
you had to be
remember,
well behaved too, though.
by and large, yeah, not always perhaps. Do you know what I also remember? What was King Street now, and now it's been rebuilt. Back in the day, as King Street traverses the Cooksville Creek, there was a natural little pond, and we would swim in that little pond on the Cooksville Creek. Wasn't a road at the time, there was a bridge. It was only many years later that from Highway 10 to the east that they actually built King Street. Before it was just a pedestrian bridge. And we would go underneath and just wade in the water there as young kids.
Wow.
I remember the old Roxy Theater. It was a Quonset hut where the Orchard restaurant is now. Used to be a big boy. And boy, it was the highlight of our weekend when mom would give us 25 cents. My brother and I, we would walk over. 15 cents got you in to see the show. 10 cents got you a drink and a candy bar.
Now, do you have any pictures of the Roxy? Our long mystery of trying to find the Roxy.
No, I don't. And yet so many people have come through it. My friends that went to T.L. Kennedy, I went to Cuthbert. Everybody remembers it because it was the thing to do when you were young and say, you watched my first film there, it was Batman.
Really?
Yeah.
I love it. The only picture we have of the Roxy comes from the newspaper, and it's a grainy black and white image of the Roxy. So, but no, fabulous, and just to see the city has evolved, obviously Cooksville, but the city as well. Well, the some of the changes that you've seen in your life, can you reflect on some of perhaps the most impactful or significant to the growth of the city, the things that stick out in your mind? Massive question, I realize.
Yeah, more than anything, I remember I was just saying King Street was a bridge. It wasn't a road. The way the road network and the transportation network has grown along with our population. So everything was a small hamlet. Streetsville was sort of way out there, and Malton was way out there. and all of the tremendous connectivity now with all of the major roads and the transit system that we built as we were becoming this emerging, growing city. So we were all very small townish then. I remind everybody, you've seen it, but people don't stop and take account of it. But when you sit in our great hall in Mississauga, the council chamber, and you look around and you see the Cooksvilles and the Port Credit and the Dixie and all those were all little standalone hamlets at the day that were brought together to create Mississauga. And it was like a two-lane road that took you there in my day, by and large, and look at what it's become now.
You must also reflect too, like you saw the early years of the city hall and the different leadership that the city has seen. You might have that consciousness of the civic consciousness of going back
Yes.
and seeing all those transitions. And you remember, I'm sure, old town hall or old city hall down at Confederation. I mean, that was in your bailiwick for years. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Matthew, it was in my backyard.
I know.
The old city hall and the fairgrounds. And our old friend, Frank Dale, Chairman Dale, who followed
Yep.
my path as well, were two Cooksville boys that got elected, he in the heart of downtown, me in Cooksville. We would remember going to the fairgrounds for events or the old city hall that was there. The building no longer stands, which of course was next to the one and only library,
Right.
which is the first place I ever took out a library book on what is Confederation and Dundas Street now.
Did it ever marvel at you in your path to, have a seat for so many years in New City Hall
No.
versus your origins?
No, no,
No?
I'm the accidental tourist in that regard. I always wanted to be a journalist, a writer. I wanted to be the next Jeffrey Simpson for the Globe and Mail, and some people probably don't even know who he is. And so when my day came, I said, you got to get trained properly. So I went and got my journalism degree, and then I got a political science degree and an economics degree because, that was the path I wanted. I wanted to have some intelligence about what I would be writing about. And yet that door never opened for me. And then as I was continuing on with studies, I was getting on my securities course licenses to work on Bay Street just because I was looking for something to do while I
Right.
was hoping to get a starting role in the media. The job came up in Ward 7, where Councillor Dave Cook stepped down in 1988. And I'm 26 years old at the time, and I wasn't thinking of it at all. But my wife, of all people, when I was approached, they said, we're born and raised there. You've got all these university degrees. Or you'd be a natural. And I didn't think I was. My parents were dead set against it.
Really?
They said, "Are you kidding? We sent you to school for some and politics. We don't want a son in politics." But it was my wife who said, Anne Marie, Nando, how can you not see you'd be perfect for this? And so on the day of my parents' anniversary, February 8th, I resigned from Bay Street, started knocking on doors. My wife supported the family and I for 10 months. And I think that was 11 elections ago.
Wow. I just, like you said, the accidental path, I guess, in a way,
Yeah.
right? You must have been the youngest councillor to be elected. I mean,
I'll tell you an interesting story about that. So I get elected, and boy, you can imagine the pantheon that I encountered when I get there. They were legends. So I show up, and there's Hazel McCallion, and there's Councillor Kennedy, and there's Councillor McKechnie. And my first meeting with Councillor McKechnie, the legend of Malton,
yeah.
he comes up to me and he goes, "Nando Iannicca." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "October 11, 1961. And I said, "Yes, that's my birthday. You beat me by 90 days." So he'd already checked to see if he could still lay claim to being the youngest councillor ever.
Fair
And
enough.
I was oblivious to it. So had he not told me, I would not have known. I don't know that it's even been broken since then. I'm sure
I
it will
don't
be
think so.
someday.
I really
But
don't.
that was my first meeting. And we sat on what a councillor column. We had some marvelous people on that council. I'll tell you the other thing that I remember looking back, knowing that you would be asking the question. Do you know what is a marvel that I look back on now when I speak to it? All the amazing women that I worked with on Mississauga Council. Remember, this is 4 decades ahead of our time.
Yep.
When women couldn't break that glass ceiling, still having challenges today. I have only worked for and I have only known female mayors in Mississauga.
Yep.
Of course, the legend Hazel McCallion.
Right.
But then I had the privilege of working under Bondi, Mayor Crombie, and now we have Carolyn Parrish.
Yep. Yeah,
We've only had and the women that I worked with on Councillor Prentice, Councillor Mullen, Councillor Mahoney, and on and on. When I would step down, I would be replaced by Deepica Demirla. I have always worked with women, and oftentimes a majority of women. And, I'm so blessed for it. I've said it before. I don't want to sound stereotypical, but we govern best when you have women in the room. They're the natural nurturers. I get myself in trouble. I said, if you left it to all the men, we'd eventually cannibalize the place. So nice that we had that warm, steady hand that I benefited from immensely. It made me a far better person. So when you look back at the experiences of other places and our history is written, one of the biggest ones that people probably aren't aware of is the extent to which women have played such a huge role in the growth and the transformation of Mississauga from a small little hamlet to a great small city.
Right. No, exactly. And I think when you reflect, you look at our Citizens of the Year, or the Wall of Citizens of the Year, you look at
Yeah.
our council members or council leadership, the mayors, etc. I mean, it's such a dynamic core of women that have really steered the ship for
Yeah.
Mississauga. So how many terms as councillor for you? Did you say 11?
It was 30 years in all, but back
Yeah.
then, remember, we had 3-year terms. Then, believe it or not, some people, the first original terms were 1 year before my time. I remember
Yep.
Councillor McKechnie. Then it went to 2 years. But that was all part and parcel of Ontario being an agrarian society. We were all farmers because,
Right.
the same rules applied here as they would in Kapuskasing or in Collingwood or what have you. And
Yep.
the farm folks said, I haven't got time. It was an honorary vocation for, they really didn't make much money, but you had to manage your town affairs. So that's why they only did 1 year, so
Yep.
I'm told, because the farmer said, I'm willing to do it. It's my turn, almost like a volunteer thing.
Yeah.
And, I got to get back to running the farm or doing the work that needs to be done in town. So they rolled 1 year, 2 years. I started at 3, then we ended up at 4. But between the elections and appointments and regional chair, I think it's been 11 goes I've had at it, and lucky enough that worked out my way because of the blessings people have bestowed upon me, the voters and my colleagues. So I've been very, very blessed. I've had a really
Well,
good run.
you think of it at 30, absolutely, and there's a vote of confidence from the people you represented, right? Like this is you're obviously representing your community, but you're tied to your community, and that's steering
Yeah.
the ship in terms of the changes that are coming. I know not everybody's happy with changes that happens, and
Yeah.
but when you reflect on 30 years, and I'm going to throw a curveball at you here from our questions, but if you reflect on those 30 years, are there things that you're most proud of, or had, you look at it and go, we accomplished something there.
Yeah.
Either your personal hand in it or just the city as a whole?
Two things.
Yep.
At sort of the macro level, sometimes it's others that observes things. You're in the middle of it and you sometimes miss it. But it was one of the most interesting perspectives I'd ever received from someone about the success of Mississauga. And this is how they said it. They were taught, and they were very honest, they were from the land development community and very prominent family. They developed all through Southern Ontario. And they were sitting down with me and they were saying, Nando, when you look at what you started with in Cooksville and all these communities, when you look at what you've done, good, bad, or indifferent, it's not bad because a lot of other places screwed it up. And I thought, what a interesting, almost backhanded way of making that observation. So certainly people can criticize, and maybe this, it works pretty well. Not perfect, but it works pretty well. And what an interesting way of putting it. A lot of other places screwed it up or never achieved it the way you did. So you haven't done too badly. And I thought, what an interesting way of couching it. In terms of personally, I think, and it's my greatest joy, between myself, Mayor McCallion, and then Councillor Dale, and would go on to become regional chair. When you look at the downtown core, because of our longevity, all of us went on for 30, 40 years. We're virtually responsible for every building having been built in the downtown core.
Yeah.
When you see the Mississauga skyline, because of the city center secondary plan that was worked on in 87, and Frank Dale and I and the mayor approved it in 88, where you could have unlimited heights, unlimited density, would be reduced part, and you had to build a downtown core. We are responsible for every single building in the downtown core.
Right.
And, as I come from a drive from afar and you can see our skyline compared to Toronto, sometimes I'm coming in on a plane. The rare times I'm in a plane and you see that skyline and you go, wow, we had a role in that. It really was the three of us because we had such longevity. And again, some people may say, maybe didn't get this right, didn't get that right. But boy, there's a lot we got right. As part of that, one of my legacies, the one that I'm most proud of course, is Celebration Square. And a lot of people don't remember the story, but we had our square, and it really, I didn't think it was the greatest meeting place of all. And, I'm a fan of the European model of life and the livable community, the walkable community. You need great meeting places. And of course, in Italy and other, they're defined by the town square or the piazza. And I've argued before, unwittingly, but so much of North American architecture almost had as its thought as they were building downtowns, no people, no problems. They almost built the properties to exclude you. Some might not remember, but as you used to come across Burnhamthorpe Road, the first thing you saw was a marvelous monument for our folks that served in war. But it was this big imposing wall right at Burnhamthorpe. It almost said, as I say, no people, no problems, keep out. It is remarkable how much of the architecture that we have in North America. You just see some of these grandiose buildings where the first thing you see is 30 steps to get to them. A lot of people can't climb 30 steps. And it was whether there were judicial buildings or city halls across North America. As I said, it was like unwittingly, we are building it with the thought that if we have no people, we have no problems. That really meant a lot to me to have a great meeting place in our square. So people forget, and I've got to give a shout out to a couple of individuals, one of whom is Brad Butt. Amazing how paths come back. That the province put out their infrastructure program to kickstart events and get them started. And we all had our wish lists. And when the list was presented, it did not include Celebration Square. And it was $30 million. And I can say it now, I didn't say it at the time, because it was one-third provincial, federal, and local. We had gotten to the point where we had to do repair works on the underground garage. So I said, we're not going to tell them, but we've already earmarked 13, 14 million to do the underground work. Our money's in. Can we put it on? And a bit of a back and forth. And I remember Mayor McCallion saying, let's make Councillor Iannicca happy. I don't know that they're going to fund it, but if they fund it, so be it. And the rest is history. And there we have Celebration Square. So that's I'm really proud of, because it's just because it's the gift that keeps giving, and it defines great cities and all the events that we've had there. So I think Chair Dale, Councillor Dale, and I will tell you it's probably our longest lasting legacy.
I would say what a lasting legacy for the city, because it's certainly a space that is used constantly now.
Yeah.
It's I remember years ago, you'd look out City Hall and there'd be nobody in the square, right? Like now you got events over through the summer every weekend. There's stuff going on all the time. Library spills out into the square. I think it's a wonderful use of space. So kudos for that. You have been involved with many organizations over a lengthy career, I understand, and we probably can't hit them all, but what are some of the groups or organizations you've been involved with that are really intrinsic to that city identity, the city development, if you will?
Yeah. Well, remember, I started by telling you I was born at South Peel Hospital. Years later, they would reach out to me and ask me to sit on the foundation. And I sat on the foundation, I think, for 8 years. And all of us, race, creed, color, whatever it might be, we all need hospitals. And the emergence of that hospital, interesting story there as well. Hospitals are like airports. They're very unusual entities that as they grow, you can't shut down the one you've got,
right?
Because planes still have to land. If you're building a new sports complex, this is quite common. They build a new one across the road. So when the last game's played here, they knock it down. You just go across the road the next season.
Right.
We don't have that luxury with hospitals and with airports. All that to say, the original South Peel Hospital is still inside of the hospital that's there now. And yet here we are now rebuilding the new hospital. I'm going to the ground. And hospitals are the entities that we will all need. We're an aging society. So that one really, really means a lot to me, because at some point in time, we all bump up and need the care and love of a hospital. And, I've given this speech before. Great entities, great communities have great institutions, and your medical community, your policing community, your governmental community, et cetera, your law enforcement community, all very, very important. And having medical systems like that, and the legacy of the new one that's going to be built, 26 stories, tallest, biggest building, I think, in terms of hospitals in North America, built under the modern era, so that I could have been born on that site, helped with all of the renovations as the local councillor as it kept growing. And now this legacy piece, because that's the gift that gives to everyone.
No, absolutely. When I know you've already had some names, and I'm sure they go without saying, like Mayor Hazel and Bonnie Crombie and others. But if you could look and reflect on some of the people that have had a big impact on either you or help making the city a special place in your eyes, and again, it could be a countless list, and I understand that, but
Yeah.
just a hat tip to some of the people whose shoulders you stand upon.
But I always start with my mom and dad because I tell two stories of all that I'm proud of. What I'm proud of the most is I picked the right parents and I picked the right wife, and I don't know that I can get much credit for either one of those. And that my dad had the courage to come across an ocean and raise his family here. They passed away, mom and dad, never speaking English. Daddy worked his
Really?
40 hours at the brickyard and overtime for 40 years just so he could put his four kids through university 11 times. We are so, so blessed. So at the top of my list are my mother and father. I have to tell you, the people that I've worked with, Hazel once said this, and it was so right. Developers get a bad name and they're the big bad developer, but she had an amazing point. We dealt with some first class people in Mississauga as they were building the city. And the reason was they had a stake in the city. They weren't the fly by night. I just bought one piece of land. I want to sort of get every dollar I can and move on. So I'm talking about families like Mr. Caniff, like the Ship family, like the Fidani Orlando family, like all of the Aaron Mills Development Corp guys that bought big tracts of land and were there for the long haul.
Yeah.
Great little story in that regard. And a lot of people don't realize it. We talk about development levies now. Do you know the origin of development levies? Everybody remarks about Hazel. It was Mayor Dobkin. And he didn't call them development levies at the time, and Ontario didn't know they existed. But what he said to this community, and then Hazel really improved upon it, made it bigger and better, was you come in, you buy the land, you build the homes, and you leave. But clearly, these people need services. They need community centers. They need libraries. They need park. You should be part of that equation. So before legislation even existed, the Harold Ships of the world, the Mr. Caniff, all of them said, we see your point. So as gentlemen and as legislators, they arrived at a deal that says, we will front end the cost of this library before the legislation existed. So and I go back to Hazel because we were blessed with some great builders that built a great city, and they had a stake in its future because they weren't fly by night. They developed the first block of land, and they had another 100,000 acres and they wanted to do it right. And they lived in our community.
Right. Right.
So, we gave guidance. We had to give approvals. These are the people that had the courage to make an investment and to see our city grow. And as I said, maybe we've gotten more right than we've gotten wrong. So a real shout out to them. The other piece that I always bring up, of course, is our volunteers. Do you know, if you had to put a value on all of the people, all the social service clubs, the Rotarians, the people that ran the sports groups, the people that made hockey arenas run at night, you really got to give a shout out to them because that's really the fiber of what a city is. So far too many to remember, but we have so many preeminent individuals that it gave so much of their time to the community. People praise politicians. I was paid to do this. I had the privilege. You've given me a life of privilege. You don't have to praise me. I've been honored that this has been bestowed. These people did it as volunteers with no reward to themselves. And so big shout out to them as well.
Absolutely is what makes a city home, right? It's just
Yep.
Remarkable. So we've been looking backwards into our past, and I could do that all day long. I love the stories, Terry Iannicca, that's just wonderful. If you could look forward, the city in which you've been born and raised in, and have had the pleasure of serving and now serving at a higher level with the region of Peel. If we could look forward to the next 50 years for the city, do you have a hope or a vision for the future of the city that you see that will come to be?
Yeah, I'm incredibly excited for the city and for the region. I think we are so well positioned for the future. There was a study done many, many years ago that talked about the wealth of nations and communities. And when you ask the average person, what do you think makes a community, a country great? What allows it to prosper? Many people will first guess education. Believe it or not, that's number 2 on the list, the studies have shown. What is number 1 that is the greatest determinant of wealth of emerging cities is immigration. And isn't that remarkable? All of North America is an immigration
Mhm.
case study. We all came from somewhere else.
Yep.
We all left something behind and came here, and we weren't stifled by, where you were born and what class you were in society. You just came, you worked hard, and anybody could get ahead. And so, as I look at what we've done so far, with more immigration to come, and some people, look down on it. The fact of the matter is, they let my family in and your family in as well,
Yep.
and look at what we've built. I am so excited by all the immigration and growth and the organic growth that's going to come because, if we think we're a big city now, we will continue to emerge. Before Mr. Caniff passed away, Iggy, I would not have known, but I was with him 1 month before he passed away, not knowing that he would pass away in a month.
Right.
Still all there, quick as a whip, great supporter of Hazel's. Hazel admired him immensely. And I was saying, Iggy, when you look back at what you've done, your success, and he said, Nando, if I was starting today, I would have done 10 times more. And I said, really? He goes, Nando, don't you see all the opportunity that we have? And between the educational facilities that he was such a supporter of, the 400 series highway, they call it Toronto Airport and Canada's international airport. It's our
Yep.
airport, period, full stop. And
Welcome
the
to
wealth that it brings.
Mississauga.
Our proximity to the US market, you've heard me probably say before, in Peel, $2 billion of products traverse our roads every day. And that's employment, jobs, that's delivery of the goods that we need, et cetera, et cetera. We're just getting started when you compare us to, as a relatively young country, people think we have a lot of people, 40 million. The Chinas and the Indias are coming up on 1.5 billion.
Yeah.
So where do you think many of them are going to come? They're going to come here with opportunity. And by and large, we get their brightest and their best, and their kids end up being kids like you and me that take advantage of this opportunity, our educational system, and contribute and make it a bigger and better place. So believe it or not, in as much as people think we've done a lot, gradually, but over time, there's so much more to come. People talk about percentages, algorithmic growth, linear growth, exponential growth. This is all you need to know. Throw all the numbers out. By 2051, the area you and I are sitting in right now, the greater metropolitan Toronto area, of course, that includes Mississauga, Brampton, and Caledon, we will be adding by 2051 the population of Montreal and Vancouver.
Unbelievable.
Think about that.
Yeah.
Toronto's our biggest city. Montreal second. We will be absorbing Montreal and Vancouver to boot in the next 30 years. And I repeat, the growth represents challenges. But it is opportunity, and it is the rising tide that lifts all boats. So it's an exciting future. And as much as I'm getting to the end of my career, as Mr. Caniff put it, what an exciting time to be. And so we pass the reins on to the next community, and there will be the next Hazel, and there will be the next. I'm a real believer, and Hazel and I would discuss this as well. You fear when you lose a matriarch like Hazel or others. But I love that line that says, cemeteries are filled with people we thought we couldn't live without, and we live without them.
Yep.
Do you remember, a big shout out to Bonnie Crombie, do you remember when, Hazel's gone, what happens next? Well, Bonnie took the mantle and life went on.
Yep.
Worked out pretty good. And more people, life goes on without us, and we need the next young immigrant. We need the next family that's been here forever, the person that wants to get into the entrepreneur, etc. And we have so many of them getting ready to take the mantle that I'm just so excited for the future. There'll be bumps and bruises and growths and tough decisions to make.
Yep.
But how can you not step back, certainly from my vantage point, and say, as good as what we've done, there's so much more to come. Another point that I speak to in that regard, I could never dream that I would be Wayne Gretzky, but if I was Wayne Gretzky, and we're almost the same age, the greatest joy that I would have in life right now, if I could coach the kid that broke all my records. That's legacy. It'll be bigger and better and brighter, and will be forgotten, and you pass the torch to the next, and you hope they do it much better, and they will. They will. So I just have such optimism for the future. Our proximity, as I say, to the hub of Canada. Like, we are the wealth center of an entire nation. And as I say, our international airport, the immigrants that are coming in, the intellectual knowledge that comes in, the institutions that we've created, so many more to come. So I'm really excited for the future. There are those that'll come after us and do a bigger, better job than even we did.
What a wonderful note to leave off on, and just think about handing out the place better than you found it. I remember that from a camping analogy, but you know what, Councillor, or I was going to say Councillor Iannicca, Chair Iannicca, Thank you so much for spending some time with us here and sharing your moments and milestones and memories here at the City of Mississauga. I know it's near and dear to your heart, everything we've spoken about. And thank you for your service, continued service, but also your dedication to the City of Mississauga. Really appreciate it.
It's been my privilege and honor. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for spending some time with us here on Ask a Historian. And thank you also to Chair Nando Iannicca for sharing his moments, milestones, and memories with us for the City of Mississauga's 50th anniversary. Like, subscribe, and follow us, and we will see you on future episodes here with Heritage Mississauga.